I've wanted to start a series of top 10 videos for some time, so here we are. So we're beginning with top 10 musical moments. Now, that doesn't mean top 10 albums or top 10 singles. It doesn't mean top 10 rock bands or jazz bands or whoever. These are musical moments. This is a bit different. So what do I mean by musical moments? Well, it can be anything. It can be something which said who you were at a particular age. Was there a song or an album that spoke to you, that represented you during those times? Maybe when you were at school, there was one song which sort of dominated your school life. It doesn't have to be a time period thing. It could be something to do with an event. So for example, a particular concert that you went to. Maybe when you met your husband or wife or partner, there was a song playing, and that is important to you. As far as I'm concerned, the moments I'll be listing in this top 10 will be it'll be sort of structured along my life, really. So, number 10. The first musical moment was a 7-inch single. Now, I'd be about 8, 9 years old. I knew nothing about music in any way, shape or form, apart from what I heard on the radio or I saw on television. I had an auntie. She decided to donate to me a whole ream of 7-inch singles and a few LPs. It was on Philips. It was originally released in 1961. And I always remember the first verse. Still remember it now. I haven't looked on the internet to check the lyrics on this, but it stayed in my head. And it went something like this. And if you can remember the name of the single, you get 5 points. If you get the guy who sang it, I'll give you another 5 points. And a bonus 5 points if you can tell me who was the co-writer of this particular song. That's a tough one. But the first verse went something like this. Every morning at the mine, he was seen in line. He stood 6'6" and weighed 245. He was broad-shouldered, narrow at the hip, and everyone knew he can give no lip to Big John. And that was the name of the song, Big Bad John. And it was a story. At that age, 7, 8, 9, I was reading Enid Blyton fairy tales. I loved books and I disappeared into them. I loved being involved in a sort of narrative. Big Bad John by Jimmy Dean, co-written by Roy Acuff. That's your extra 5 points, by the way. This was a song that told a story. It told a story of, it told the story of Big Bad John, didn't it? So he goes to the mine. He's equally feared and respected. There's a disaster. The mine caves in. Big Bad John saves 20 men during this calamity. And he doesn't make it. Because it was a narrative, because it was a story, because I loved books at the time, this sparked my imagination and it drew me in to music as a book lover. I was a book lover first, and then I was drawn into music, and in many ways, this one single did it. Number 9 kicked in around age, I don't know, 11-ish, 10, 11. What happened was this. My father came home one day with a portable cassette deck, something like this. Now, this isn't the original cassette deck that I was given by my dad, but it's something like that. It's that portable design with a slide-out handle, and you can take it around with you, runs on batteries, that type of thing. When I was given this, I wasn't given any spare tapes, but there was a tape inside the actual cassette. This was the only tape I owned, and from memory, it contained all but one song, Dave Brubeck's Take 5. Now, I had no interest in jazz before I heard this, but this was all I had, apart from my dance set and my auntie's records donation. And once you've played those 10 billion times, you begin to tire of them, you know? So this portable cassette came through and amazing, I had a new song to play and it wormed its way into my head. Now, for number 8, I would have been 11, 12 or so when this particular single appeared. Another single that was important to me because it introduced me to Queen. Queen became my group. It was the first time I had ever adopted a group. It was the first time that I ever became fascinated by one artist, or in this case, a band. It was the first time that I wanted to collect all the albums from one particular musical artist. And it was because of Bohemian Rhapsody. Now, what really got me about the song itself was a particular part, and I'm not alone apparently, because about 4 minutes in, there was a hell of a rock break about 4 minutes in. This was a guitar riff which was apparently written by Freddie Mercury himself, and it's an amazing sort of change in focus, change in tempo from the earlier opera. That really got me, that point. And I thought, oh yeah, these guys are interesting. Okay, there's a bit of thought going on here. I love the whole creative process of Bohemian Rhapsody, and from that point on, bang, I was a big Queen fan. Number 7 was released in 1978. I would be 14 at that time. It reached number 5 in the UK charts, and it was released by a guy called Andrew Gold. This song, Never Let Us Slip Away, was, well, apart from it being a great song, it was one I could sing. Now, at that time, I was singing music all over the place. I would wait for my parents to leave the house on the weekend, you know, for work or whatever, and I would bellow out a good old song. The neighbours must have hated me. I must have scared all the neighbours' cats. Anyway, bellow out that one. It was in my range, you see. It was in my vocal range. So Never Let Us Slip Away, I loved. And there was a time at school where we had a music lesson. And the music lesson was not really respected by the kids in my class, put it that way. There was an awful lot of hijinks, if I can put it also in that respect. So it was never really it was more like a free period. And myself and this other guy, whose name was Guy, funnily enough, we used to use it as a time to create vocal harmonies. And we would sing Andrew Gold's Never Let Us Slip Away as a vocal harmony. We could have set up a group together. I've missed my vocation. We could have been another Simon and Garfunkel. Now, number 6 is when I got into prog. The Yes album, that was the one I wanted to put in number 6. Now, I loved prog. Again, this would be 14 or so. I got really into prog. So we're looking at the likes of Yes and Genesis and a little bit of Jethro Tull. Now, as I said to you, my Andrew Gold. I love to sing. And I had quite a high voice. I could really hit the high registers. Now, listening to Yes and John Anderson, who sang up there, I tried to emulate this guy. The problem with trying to sing like John Anderson is it causes damage, either to your throat, although I got away with that, but more to your hi-fi, and that's where the issues were. So, again, I would wait for the folks to go to work on a Saturday. I'd get all my hi-fi out. I would put the Yes album on the turntable. It was a Technics SLB2 Grado cartridge, I think. A Denyo integrated amp. Do you remember that? That's a bit of a... You don't hear of Denyo amps anymore. And a pair of Wharfedale Shelton speakers. Now, when you went to those heights and you pumped up the volume and you hit those watts in the... Well, however far Wharfedale Sheltons actually went at that time, I used to blow my tweeters regularly. So what would happen? My folks would come back from work and I would say to my dad, tweeters have gone, Dad. And we would package up the Wharfedale speakers, not like today where you could just ring a courier, he'd come round, DHL it to whoever, 5 minutes later it comes back and you're off and running. Oh, no, no, no. In those days, you had to package everything up, you had to go down to the railway station, you had, well, I did anyway, where I was, you had to then go to a sort of parcel force depot in the railway station, hand it over, he'd put it on these big scales. It was a big rigmarole. It was such an involved process. So sending anything off to Wharfedale to be fixed was a massive process. Anyway, back it would eventually come, like 10 years later, or that's how it seemed. Out they go to work. On will go the Yes album once more. John Anderson, me, singing, Watts, bang. Dead tweeters. Back to the railway station. So, as far as I'm concerned, John Anderson owes me for quite a few busted tweeters. Now, around that time, the Yes album I bought, but it wasn't my first LP. just before that, the very first LP I ever bought was a live album. It was by 10cc and it was called Live and Let Live. This was a double album, I think. And the reason I bought it was because I had no cash and I wanted an album featuring their hits. So I thought, great, this would be a good way to hear them live and hear the hits as well. But the purchase of the album itself meant a lot to me because it was the first time I had bought myself an album. And back then, buying a vinyl album was a big thing. People didn't really have the disposable income, or certainly at that age, they didn't have the disposable income that they have now. There wasn't an awful lot of cash going around for younger people. So for me to walk in to a record shop and actually buy a vinyl album, it was like buying a house for a 14-year-old. It was a major purchase decision, buying a vinyl album. It was a big thing as well. You know, it sort of meant a lot. You actually took home a big physical object, and it was full of photographs. Well, it was a live album, so not artwork, but full of photographs and liner notes and pieces of vinyl and stuff. It was all it was a lot going on. So that was a momentous decision. Sort of mentally, it was a shift. It meant that I now started buying albums. I felt slightly more grown up, as it were. So it was a line that was crossed. Now, number 4 is a concert. And I won't go on too much about this because I've already talked about it before. It was a concert to see Kraftwerk at the Liverpool Royal Court. It must have been around 81 because Computer World came out in 81, and that's when I went to see them with a couple of friends. I talk about the whole experience in another video, and I will put a link up yonder. It was my first proper concert. And so again, it opened a world. It opened the world of actually going to see your favourite artist. It was also a big thing because you felt independence. You know, you were not going with your parents. It was something whereby you were just going with your friends. It was a shared experience between you and your friends. So socially, it's a big thing. You're going to a big event, and you know, again, you feel a bit more grown up because of this. And it's, you know, you're paying your money, you're getting your ticket, you're with like-minded people. The whole thing is quite invigorating. So mentally, again, it's a bit of a sort of, you know, you're crossing a boundary, as it were. So this is a big thing. Now, number 3, you're moving into my 20s now. Now, in my 20s, I loved indie music. Now, the tag indie music these days means nothing at all. Indie bands, well, it doesn't mean anything. Back in the early 80s to mid 80s, indie music meant the world. It meant independence away from major record labels. It was a continuing of the punk ethic of do it yourself, of get up off your backside and just get in there and just get stuck in and just do it. Indie bands, you felt, were more like one of us, you know? It was not a case of the big record labels, the EMIs of this world, where any band on EMI or Warner's or whatever, Universal, were always put on a pedestal and they were godlike. Indie bands, you felt as though they were on your level. I felt as though my musical education really began in my early 20s. I was a slow beginner in terms of learning about music on a broad level. But in my early 20s, I listened more to the likes of John Peel, legendary DJ who's no longer with us, sadly. But also there were, at that time I was living in Liverpool in the UK. So there were local radio stations who would be playing local bands too. And at that time in Liverpool, there was quite a thriving scene. Now at that time, there was a band called Big in Japan. And in the band Big in Japan, well, there was a whole host of future stars. One of them is Ian Brodie, who would become part of the Lightning Seeds. And in another band, there was a guy called Paul Simpson, who used to be part of a band called the Wild Swans. They got together, good friends, and started a band called Care, C-A-R-E, Care. Now, Care didn't produce a great deal, but they did produce around that time, sort of early 80s, a 12-inch single called Flaming Sword, I think it was. Paul Simpson was on lead vocal. And what got me about Care was a B-side. There were 2 tracks on the B-side. One was called On the White Cloud. It was an instrumental, a beautiful piece of instrumental work, and I loved it. I love the whole indie scene, and I love the fact that some bands will appear, release one 7-inch single and disappear again. I thought the whole thing was great. It seemed very fluid, it seemed very energetic, it seemed quite dynamic, and I just loved the whole sort of immediacy of the indie scene. And there was some superb music as well. I found an awful lot of my favourite bands from that time. Number 2 comes from the dance band The Orb. When I say dance band, I don't really think of them as dance band, more ambient dub, put it that way. Ambient dub is a genre I love. And when I hit my 30s, in fact it was 31, I had a complete change in the way I thought. I've heard this a lot actually. In fact, tell me if this has ever happened to you. Early 30s is a critical year in your human development. So many people I have heard, they hit 30, 31, 32, and they have this complete change in how they think, how they are, what their ambitions are as a human being, relationships, everything about that person can totally change when they hit that early 30s. It did for me. 31 was my year of change. I heard The Orb. When I heard Little Fluffy Clouds, I don't know why, but that one single just triggered. Something in my head went click, and I suddenly, I don't know, doors opened. I suddenly thought, oh, you know, I had that sort of life thing where I thought, oh, right, okay, right, I'll go this way then, bye. And it just, something happened. And it was that song which did it to me. I've never taken drugs in my life. And why? Because music does this to my head. Music does things to my head. Music changes my thoughts. Why do you need a drug for that? I've got music which does this all for me. And you can tell I'm an addict. Right, number 1. Okay. Inside, I'm quite a shy character. It might not come through, and you might not see it. You might, but you might not. But I used to be very shy. It used to stop me doing things back in the day. And it came to a point, like I say, I had a change of mind and direction when I was 31. 32-ish, I decided I was going to dance. I yearned to dance when I was young. I wanted to go to clubs and discos and boogie on down until the morning came up, but I never did that. I never did that. And I thought, now's the time. While I can still walk, and while I've got all my hair and all my teeth, I thought, I will do this. So, grabbed my girlfriend and off we went, and I danced. And I enjoyed it. It was beautiful. The song that was almost iconic for me at that time was a song called Insomnia by a band called Faithless. You could call it house music if you like. In the early days of trance, what trance used to be known as back in the mid-90s, it could be called trance. A bit later on it would have been called intelligent techno. There were lots of different tags, but it had a beautiful melody, it had a little bit of rap going through it, and it was a wonderful production. And if you were dancing to this thing, you could really let yourself go. It was a beautiful track. But to me, most importantly, it's a sort of symbol of freedom, the freedom to dance, to really let yourself go. And that's what it did for me. And it was an emotional thing. I really connected with this song and really threw myself into it. Thank goodness there's no footage that I can show on YouTube. Phew. But at the time, I had a lovely time and a whale of a time. And it's a great way to end my top 10. Give me your top 10 moments. I would love to know what your top 10 moments were. If you can tell me why, all the better. If you just want to give me a list, that's fine. If you just want to give me your top 5 or top 3, that's okay too. If I get enough in, as I say, I will do a sort of viewers top 10 list here as a sort of follow-up. For now, check out my Patreon page. If you can support me, that's great. I'll put a link below. I also have a Facebook group, and you're very welcome to join me and join the rest of us. We've got about, we're getting on for 5,000 members on that now, so check that out. I'll put a link below to that too. Other social media platforms, I'll put links to those. That includes my site, which features around 5 years worth of content, so there's a whole host of reading there. But apart from all that, I would love you to join me on the next video. Until then, bye bye bye.